We know now that Sumerian literature consists primarily of epics, proverbs, fables, and essays of various sorts, especially essays in relation to education. That tells us something about the old education.
Kramer gripped the clay tablet until his knuckles turned white. He was 91 and out of time. He needed to tell the world that the Sumerians weren't worshiping gods. I am going to talk about his final breakthrough, reveal the truth about base 60 math.
These disputations and these essays tell you a great deal. However, we must exonerate Mr. Seville a little bit. They are very difficult to translate.
And you won't believe why he thought our brains are failing. What most people don't realize is that these translations define our entire past. Yeah, about that. Those definitions might be a total fantasy. He knew it, and now you are going to know it too. The truth is sitting in a basement. The secret interviews of Samuel Noah Kramer. This little piece of clay is packed full of information from 4,200 years ago. The language of the inscription is Sumerian. Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest forms of written record that we have. There is footage they never wanted you to see. Samuel Noah Kramer was 91 years old and just weeks from passing away. This was the man who single-handedly taught the modern world everything it knows about humanity's first civilization. He was sitting in a Philadelphia basement that smelled like clay dust and dying secrets. His hands were trembling over tablets older than the Bible. And he was about to say something on camera that would make his colleagues wish he had stayed silent. Before I die, please listen. We have gotten this wrong. Not the details, but the whole framework. For 50 years, this man was the authority on ancient Sumer. His word was final. His translations were gospel. And in his final days, he admitted all of it might be wrong. The academic establishment buried these interviews, but the transcripts survived. This is what they did not want you to hear. The man who owned Sumer was ready to talk. Here is what you need to understand about Samuel Noah Kramer. For 50 years, this man did not just study Sumer. He was Sumer, at least as far as the modern world was concerned. Every textbook you have ever read about the world's first civilization, his translations, every museum exhibit explaining those wedge-shaped symbols pressed into clay, his interpretations, every academic paper, every documentary, and every college lecture about where human civilization actually began. All of it traced back to the basement of the University of Pennsylvania Museum to one man. And now I can turn it around and have a look at the writing that has been hiding underneath. So, no one has seen that writing for 4,000 or 5,000 years. The only person that has seen it previously is the one who wrote it. Surrounded by clay tablets covered in marks that nobody else could read, he deciphered thousands of them. Literally, thousands. And get this. When he started in the 1920s, Sumerian was basically a dead language, with no instruction manual, no native speakers, and no dictionaries. He taught himself by comparing texts, finding patterns, and building vocabulary word by word over 6 decades. His 1956 book, History Begins at Sumer, introduced millions to a civilization most had never heard of. The first recorded love song, the first legal code, and the first school system. Every time archaeologists dug up new tablets anywhere in the world, they shipped them to Kramer. He was the authority, the final word, and the bridge between the modern world and humanity's deepest past. What most people don't realize is that Kramer was the gatekeeper for an entire era of human existence. The warning signs academic elites ignored. So, here is a man at the absolute peak of his field. He had honorary degrees from universities worldwide. His translations were in every textbook. Students across the globe were learning ancient history from his words. But here is the catch. Kramer was never comfortable with his own conclusions. And by the end, he had realized why. The footnotes that nobody read started appearing quietly. So quietly that almost nobody noticed. If you went back to Kramer's academic papers from the 1960s and 70s, and I mean really read them, you would find something strange buried in the footnotes. He mentioned astronomical references, a moon, a star, and various symbols which even could be symbolized as a wristwatch, technology being used 6,000 years ago. Little notes almost whispered that a particular word has no exact English equivalent. A concept is difficult to render in modern terms. Certain passages have meaning that remains obscure. It seemed like normal scholarly caution, right? Every translator acknowledges difficulties. But here is the deal. The footnotes became more frequent over the years and more troubled. By the 1980s, Kramer wrote something that should have set off alarm bells. The more I study these texts, the less certain I become about their true meaning. His colleagues dismissed him. They whispered in faculty meetings that Sam was losing it. They thought he spent too long in the basement with those tablets. An aging scholar becoming overly philosophical about his life's work. It happens to the best of them. But Kramer was not being philosophical. He was being literal. He had noticed something about Sumerian thought that kept him awake at night. Something that violated every assumption he had built his career on. The Sumerian language had no word that clearly meant religion. As we understand it, none. It had no distinction between natural and supernatural. It had no concept of miracle. Do you know why? Because it had no baseline of normal for miracles to violate. The Sumerians did not separate sacred from secular or spiritual from material. These categories did not exist for them. And that word we translate as God, basically it means something closer to great power or cosmic principle. It was not clear the Sumerians worshipped these entities the way later cultures worshipped gods. It was not even clear they thought of them as beings in any sense we would recognize. In a 1987 interview, Kramer said something that should have made international headlines. When I translate a Sumerian text about the creation of the world, I use English words like creation and world. But I am no longer convinced the Sumerians had anything like our concept of creation or our concept of world. I think they might have been describing something completely different. He paused. The interviewer said his eyes looked haunted. And he added that he had spent 50 years putting their thoughts into categories they would not have recognized. Yeah, about that, the real crisis was not just the footnotes or the growing doubt in his mind. Ancient tablet that shattered every textbook. The crazy part is the tablet that finally broke him. This is where it gets truly wild. The tablet came from Nippur, an ancient city, dated to around 2100 before the Common Era. It was found decades earlier, sitting in the University of Pennsylvania Museum collection. They have been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings, and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings. Kramer had published his translation back in 1949. The text appeared to be a dialogue between a human and a god, discussing the nature of knowledge and the origin of civilization. In his version, the god explains how the gods granted civilization to humanity as a gift. It fit perfectly with the established narrative. The Sumerians believed civilization came from the gods, just like the Egyptians, the Greeks, and every ancient culture. Case closed, translation published, and he moved on. But that tablet kept nagging at him. 40 years of something feeling wrong that he could not name. In 1988, at 91 years old, Kramer returned to it one final time. His assistant said he sat in that basement for 3 hours, just staring and turning the clay over in his spotted hands. The dust was catching in his wrinkles while he tried to forget his own translation. He was trying to see what the original Sumerian actually said instead of what he had assumed it must say. And then he stopped breathing for a moment. The color drained from his face. For 3 full minutes, he did not move. His assistant asked if he needed a doctor. Kramer looked up and his voice was barely a whisper. I have had it wrong, all of it, for 40 years. Here is what he had discovered. The word he translated as gift, it could also mean awakening or remembering. The word he had translated as human, it could mean sleeping one or unaware one. The word he translated as God, it could mean fully conscious one or aware power. You see what this means? Reread the text with these alternative meanings. The tablet was not saying the gods gave civilization to primitive humans. It was saying civilization emerged when humans awakened to capacities they already possessed. It meant that what we call gods might have been the Sumerians' way of describing states of consciousness or modes of awareness. These are things we no longer access or understand. This was not a small change. This turned the entire text, and potentially every text like it, completely inside out. Kramer showed it to his colleagues. Dr. William Hollow at Yale, a man who had spent 40 years building on Kramer's translations, reportedly went pale when he read the new interpretation. He told Kramer that this would invalidate everything, including his books and his students' work. Dr. Miguel Civil at Chicago was even blunter. He told Kramer that he needed to rest, and that this was not scholarship anymore, but a breakdown. But here is the catch. Kramer could not let it go, because once he saw the truth, he could not unsee it. Dark truths behind the Sumerian collapse. Kramer went back through his major translations and all the work that had made his reputation. Text after text after text, and in every single one, he found the same problem. He had imposed modern categories onto Sumerian thought. He had made assumptions about what the text must mean based on what made sense to a 20th century academic mind. But the real shock was not just what the tablet said. It was what Kramer realized about every translation he had ever published. In those final interviews, the ones they never wanted you to see, Kramer tried to explain what he believed we had been missing for a century. It is not that simple, though, because here is what he admitted. He could not fully explain it. He was trapped in the same modern consciousness that created the problem in the first place. But he tried. He pointed to Sumerian mathematics, which used base 60. This seems random to us because we use base 10 since we have 10 fingers. That is obvious, right? But 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. It is mathematically elegant in ways base 10 cannot touch. The standard interpretation is that clever mathematicians noticed useful properties. But Kramer had a different idea. What if base 60 was not a choice? What if it reflected how they actually perceived numerical relationships? What if their consciousness structured quantity differently than ours? He pointed to their astronomy too. They tracked planetary movements with insane precision. Their star charts were accurate for thousands of years. They had knowledge about planetary cycles that Europeans did not rediscover until the Renaissance. The standard interpretation says they were patient observers. But Kramer wondered if they were perceiving these patterns more directly. He pointed to their technology, like irrigation systems of stunning sophistication, massive ziggurats, metallurgy, and urban planning. All of this appeared seemingly from nowhere around 500 before the Common Era. And get this, the tablets describing gods granting knowledge might not be religious myths at all. What if they were describing sudden cognitive shifts that made certain technologies immediately obvious? But here is where it gets really dark. Kramer started looking at what happened to Sumer itself. The civilization collapsed around 2000 before the Common Era. They were conquered, cities were abandoned, and people were scattered. The standard interpretation is that civilizations just rise and fall. But Kramer noticed something in the tablets from the final centuries of Sumer. Later texts were different, not just in what they said, but in the quality of thought. They were more concrete and practical. It was like the civilization was not just collapsing politically, it was declining in its mind. Whatever mode of consciousness made early Sumer possible was fading away. The later Sumerians were writing like people who no longer understood their own ancestors. The famous king list showed the same pattern, with early kings having impossibly long reigns of 28,800 years or 36,000 years. Later kings had normal lifespans. So here is the deal. Kramer believed this was a record of a massive cognitive shift in the human race. Do you think we have actually lost a special power our ancestors once had? Or was Kramer just an old man losing his grip on reality? Tell me your thoughts below. Like and subscribe for more.